Welcome back to the Gen 20 podcast. I'm Nicole.
And I'm Marina. Today we're chatting about self-promotion and self-advocacy with my friend Angela, a freelance videographer who just celebrated her 4th year of being her own boss.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Angela. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your business?
Thanks for having me. So I created a videography company. So I mostly work with corporations, small businesses, and entrepreneurs to make branded videos for their companies. I also do training videos, social media videos, all different types. But it's been quite a journey over the past 4 years from going to, working within a company as their videographer to creating my own company and having to find my own clients and just kind of working for myself.
How did you start working for yourself? Like, how did you transition from point A to point B?
So the idea of going from working internally to creating my own company really began out of self-advocacy, honestly. It started with my very first job out of college was hired me as a videographer for them part-time, but they needed me more than that. So they also hired me as a freelancer, which I later found out is not a super legal thing for a company to do.
Great.
And they did that so that they didn't have to pay me any benefits and they didn't have to give me a bonus and they didn't have to give me health care. So I was making barely above minimum wage as a part-time employee. I was making more when they would hire me as a freelancer. And they got to a point where there was a project that was they were going to fly me out to Chicago, and I'm East Coast based. And they wanted me there for a week, and they wanted to pay me my part-time rate for that. And I just didn't feel right about that. And I talked to my boss that I really needed more than minimum wage to spend a whole week in another city and do this huge project. And he talked to his boss, and I was fired. Yeah, so that's kind of how that went. When I,
Wow.
yeah, it's not a great story, but and in the long run, it's really good, and I'm absolutely happy I got out of that company. From there, I went to my second, corporate job, working in house again, editing videos this time instead of filming. And about a year into working there, the company kind of hit a slow point. They weren't getting in enough work to be paying for the work they already brought in. They weren't great at managing their money. And so I was the second person hired, and there were two people hired after me. One was a man, and I got my hours cut, and the man did not. Even though he technically, he was hired after me and he was technically my subordinate. But I had my hours cut in half. I was being paid hourly. And that was what made me say, you know what, I'm done. I've been working for this company. I've been trying to keep it from going under, and they cut my hours. So he actually, the owner for that company, lost the person who was hired before me. Right after he cut my hours, he didn't know she was leaving. She left. He came back to me and said, actually, would you like her position? And I said, actually, I think I'm going to quit too, but thanks. And I left and made my own company. So that's kind of what jumped me into working for myself, because I realized that a lot of times working for another company, for me anyway, in my experience, was not a stable position. It was just waiting until the company felt I wasn't necessary anymore. So I said, you know what? I'm going to make my own company, so I'm always necessary.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
And
I love that.
how funny it is that you think, oh, I have a full-time job that feels really unstable versus, oh, I'm building my own company. Because everyone always says, oh, it's better to work for someone else. They have more benefits, all these things. And my last job that I lost because of COVID, the same thing happened. It was this full-time job that I wasn't being paid enough. I didn't have benefits. And I was constantly worried they were going to run out of projects and lay me off. And then they did. So, so I was like, oh, I'm now
Thanks,
also.
COVID.
Yeah, thanks, COVID. But it's just interesting how we kind of have that narrative in our heads about stability and like how untrue it can be. So,
Mhm.
Angela, it sounds like you had a lot of roadblocks or obstacles, I guess, in your original two jobs. What what did it look like when you started your own company? What kind of obstacles did you face?
I think, being in the video industry, it's a very male dominated industry. So in the beginning and still now, I face a lot of sexism. I'll go to a shoot where um, I'm doing all the video work, but they've hired a photographer to come and do photos. And the photographer, who's usually male, will tell me that I set my camera up wrong, or that my angle just must not look right. Um, I've had AV tech people at venues tell me that I set my audio up wrong, and try to explain to me like, oh, did you know that if you lower your audio recording, you could just bump it up louder in post? And I just, it's like, this is what I get paid for. That is why I'm here. I know this information. Um,
Mhm.
even just, I filmed a conference for accountants, and I had an accountant come up to me and tell me that he owned my camera, like my $5,000 camera. He owns it. I was like, okay, cool. And then he's like, but your camera looks different than mine. And I'm like, that's because I probably own a different, more high end camera than you. Like, I don't know where this conversation's going. So it's like a very weird combination of like always proving myself, to not even necessarily my clients who hire me, but to the everyone in the peripheral who are also working with my clients, because you don't want to get that reputation of being difficult to work with. I don't want that photographer who was being a pain in my butt to go back to my client and say, you shouldn't hire her for the next event you have. She was, really difficult to work with. So it's kind of finding that balance. I think that's something that I face a little bit less of now, or maybe I'm just more confident in myself that I've been doing this for 4 years. Um, but I see that a lot in the industry. And then I think what really was hard in the beginning was figuring out my worth and how much to charge and how to ask people for money. Because in our society, we're told like, don't talk about money, don't ask about money. Like, and it's, as a business, you absolutely have to. And I think whether you're running an LLC business or whether you're just running the business of yourself, you need to be able to know your finances, know what you're worth, and be able to talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. That's hugely important. And we want to impress upon listeners and say it again because I think it's really, really hard, especially as women, to ask for money. Because I know for my writing, I've felt guilty or I've offered to do things for free. And for friends, I'll do it for free. And there's like, no, no, we'll pay you. And it's like, oh yeah, I have to be the first one to say this is what I charge and this is like I won't go any less than that.
Mhm. Yeah, it's your floor price, so you won't go below a certain amount of money for a certain scope of work. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting, Angela, you mentioned not wanting to have a reputation of being difficult to work with because as women, we're called bossy, but men are called leaders. And like I've known Angela since I was in high school, and we used to do these projects for fun in the summer where Angela would write and direct a little movie, and I would weasel my way into being in part of it as a quote unquote actress. And I was always so impressed with how organized Angela was and how clear a vision she had and how she would just be focused and get things done. And people would say, oh, Angela's bossy. And I was like, no, she's a leader. She's getting it done. We're a bunch of high schoolers who are doing this for free. That's badass. So,
Oh, thanks. I loved having you working with you in our high school movies.
oh my gosh, they were so fun. And looking back, it's like, how, why, like, how did that ever stop? I guess we all got old and moved away from one another.
Yeah. But it's true. It's my mom used to even tell me, like, we would be filming in my basement and I'd come upstairs and would say, I can hear you bossing your friends around. Why are you being so bossy? And I turned to her and be like, I'm the director. I'm directing my friends.
Yeah.
So,
And
um,
you were right.
right. But yeah, that's definitely something that I still kind of I think I struggle with that idea of I totally believe, that women need to be assertive and tell people what you need and advocate for what you need. But at the end of the day, I do always feel like I have to sometimes do it in a more delicate way than a man might have to do it because I don't want to burn a bridge. I have a service based industry where my clients can easily say, well, we didn't like your service. Your video, your
Mhm.
product was great, but the service you gave us wasn't great. So we're going to find someone else. So it's kind of this weird balancing act of knowing your self worth versus how you're portraying that, I guess, or how you're asking for it.
It's also interesting because I think when you said that you were worried that like the photographer might go back to the client, do you think the photographer in this example would ever worry that you would go back to the client and say they were difficult to work with?
Absolutely not.
I
I
don't
think
know.
I think he really honestly truly thought, and this has been multiple photographers that this has happened to me with, think that they're helping me, telling me that like, no, you just don't have the right angle. Like, what do you mean? Or someone told me like, oh, yeah, I would have picked a different camera because that camera costs a lot of money. And I was like, what? So it's kind of, I think they really have this idea that like they're not doing anything wrong. They're just being helpful. So I don't think that even crosses their mind that they could be difficult to work with. And I guess that's another part of like society puts us in that mind frame of men are expected to help and anything they say is helpful. And women are expected just to take that and they're not expected to give help. They're just expected to take help.
Mhm.
Yeah, or where women are meant to help in like a more subservient way, like a behind the scenes quiet way.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Or Nicole and I talked about this on the episode that we just launched this past week. It's like, oh, you should just be glad to be here, so don't say anything.
Mhm.
And we're tired of that grateful to be here attitude.
We deserve to be here.
We have earned our place here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I definitely, I felt that a lot with, especially my first job. Um, as you guys talked about on that podcast, I had just listened to it and it was wonderful. And it just resonated so much with this idea that um, they even, at one point considered maybe moving me to full time at that job. But they offered me something like there's 20,000 hours in a year. So if you take your hourly wage and times it by 2,000, that's going to be your hour. That's your yearly salary. And basically, that's what they did. I was getting offered pretty much minimum wage as a full time salary position using my 4-year degree. And I said, I can't accept that. And they just were like dumbfounded. They're like, but, but, you should
Mhm.
just be happy to be getting this job and people in you know rural America would take that money, but I lived in a metropolitan city and I couldn't afford to take that low of a pay cut.
Mhm.
Well, I'm proud of you for saying no because I did the opposite and I tried to push back and they said, sorry, no, we don't have any more money in the budget. And the advice I got was, well, you should take that job because it's better than no job. I said, okay, I guess I'll just hemorrhage money for a year and hope I don't like have any car trouble because I'll be in trouble. But so it sounds like you've done a lot of advocating for both yourself and your business. How do you do that?
I think first of all, you have to it's really hard, but you have to understand what your worth is. And I think um, one of the first times I realized that idea was my dad told me this theory of how nothing is free. And he read a thing where if you are offered a free t-shirt and all you have to do is wait in line for an hour, to get this free t-shirt, well, you spent 1 hour of your life and that's money, that's time and that's effort. And that free t-shirt cost you 1 hour. And then I kind of took that and I started getting all these jobs where I was getting paid hourly. And suddenly, if you're making $10 an hour and you have to spend an hour to do something, you're spending $10 to do that, and I kind of started getting that mindset. Um, And then to realize, okay, all of this extra stuff that I'm being asked to do for free is costing me money because I could be working on other projects that are making me money. And even just the idea of relaxing and watching Netflix, that's worth that time I spend relaxing is worth money to me. If you're going to tell me, hey, this project has a deadline, you got to work all night on it, no problem. I have to charge you a higher rate because that time normally would have been my relaxing time. So it's understanding that, you have 24 hours in a day. And while we traditionally work 8 hours in a day, your time is money, and any time that someone's expecting you to take time out of your personal life, they should be accommodating you for that.
I love that. I so agree. And Nicole, we've done that when we've had requested someone to do a rush service for our podcast or something, and we've offered, we recognize that we're asking for more time, so please we'll compensate you, that kind of thing. And I think
Mhm.
that it's important that you recognize that, Angela, and it's important that employers or the person requesting the service also recognize like the importance of time, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think that that was kind of like my first idea um, of kind of like where your self-worth comes from. And I know there's probably a lot better ways to look at it as well. But from a business standpoint, especially as, like I said, I've never held a salaried position, even though I've had full-time jobs. They were all paid hourly. Um, I've never had PTO in my life. So that idea, of like, okay, you give a lot to the company and then you get 2 weeks off at some indiscriminate time. No, I never had that. And it was always much more transactional of, you need me for 5 hours. That's great. I'm going to charge you for those 5 hours. And I'm not going to, you shouldn't expect me to work more unless you're expecting to be, to pay more. And you kind of just have to adjust your frame of mind, and then also just hold your ground to know if this wasn't important and if this didn't cost, if this wasn't worth money, someone wouldn't be hiring you to do it. They would
Mhm.
do it themselves, and the fact that they're asking you to do it means it's worth something and that your time is worth something.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, they're paying you for your time and your skills, both of which are incredibly valuable. And I mean, that needs to be recognized financially, in my opinion.
I agree. So, Angela, what did your first year look like of business compared to this past your fourth year?
Ooh. So, my first year of business, I basically had two major clients that made up probably 85% of the revenue I made that year. One client, both of them were contacts that I had before. And they just happened to kind of co-align with like me leaving one job. They started having more work, and they were looking for someone. I was like, hey, I've worked with you as an intern, like, how about you hire me as a freelancer? But that also really scared me at the end of the year when I saw how much of my money came from just two places. And as a business, that's really bad. You want to
Mm-hmm.
be able to
Mhm.
diversify. um, and so, that's kind of, I didn't make a ton that first year. And I was really, you know, fortunate or privileged enough to, I was engaged at the time, and my husband had a steady enough job that the fact that I didn't have to pay 50% of all of my bills, he could pick up the slack when I was um, bringing in less money that first year. So this fourth year, I have over 50 clients just in my CRM, which I did not have a CRM my first year.
And
I have 50 clients. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask, what's a CRM for
So
those of us who don't know?
yes, CRM is a client relationship management. So it's a way that, the old school way of thinking about it is kind of like, oh, I'm a salesperson. I'm going to put my sales leads in my CRM and track the pipeline of them buying things. But nowadays, it's a lot more complicated. Is the wrong word. It's a lot more diverse than that nowadays. And You can use it to track your clients. You use it to talk with them. It's relationships. It's tracking like every quote I send out to a client for a potential project, and I can track when they respond, if they say yes, if they say no. I have a list of all the quotes that got denied, which is always
Hmm.
like a little daunting to look at. But it's just like a wonderful way to stay organized. And I didn't have that, year one. I've just, over the past 4 years, I've been learning like, oh, I need to have a bookkeeping service. Oh, I need to have a CRM, oh,
Hmm.
I need to really up my website and my social media. So it's been quite a learning curve, but I've definitely grown a lot, and I'm really happy to say that this past year, not happy, I'm I'm happy to say that I'm not relying on a single client anymore. I don't have, one or two big clients and a couple of little ones. I have a lot of diverse clients who are actually nationwide, and that's really helped me keep afloat during COVID, actually.
That's great. Yeah, I was going to ask, how have you seen changes in the last 5 months?
Oh yeah. So that first month, I think like everybody thought um that it's only going to be 2 weeks. So everything just got like a pause. All of my projects were just, oh, we'll just pause it for 2 weeks. And then 2 weeks go
Hmm.
by and we'll just pause it for another 2 weeks. Um, and so that, the first month and a half was really bad. But then once people realized like we're not gonna just pause and get back to life as we know it, things started picking up again. And like I mentioned, I have clients, I do both filming and editing, and I work with companies, I work with production companies and corporate companies, and, I work with people all over the country. So I've actually had clients who are in more rural areas that weren't as heavily affected by COVID, still being able to film, and they send me stuff to edit. Or I have clients who switched from doing in person interviews to doing Zoom interviews, and I edit that footage for them and I do consultations for them. So I've been able to pivot a little bit, which is really nice. Um, but like anything, I think like everyone, there was that first couple months of just, what do we do?
Hmm. Yeah, we've all been reeling from it, I think. But the importance is for sure being able to pivot and know and it goes back to your advocating for yourself and knowing your worth, knowing your value, knowing your skills. You can pivot because you can then help people see. Sometimes people can't see what their options are because they just don't know. Not everyone thinks, oh, if I can't do an in-person interview, I'll do it on Zoom. Like, I think a lot of us have just only done in-person interviews. And so trying to reframe how we think about things is hugely important, especially and knowing uh, how you can help people. You can suggest those things too.
Definitely. It's kind of using that creativity mind of, you look at something and it's, hey, we always have done it this way. And then realizing, well, what if we didn't do it that way? And it's just, you know, tr- diving headfirst into a challenge and just seeing something that could be catastrophe and looking at it like this is a challenge and I'm going to challenge myself to figure out this puzzle.
Yeah, definitely. So how like so in this you've had to do a lot of self-promoting, I'm sure. What does that look like for you?
So I think self promotion can come in a couple of different ways. Um, it's to me that's the idea of promoting yourself, of showing what you can do, and that's either through like marketing for a business, or just showing and telling people about your strengths as a person. Either it's in a job interview or it's just hang out with your friends. I think the idea of, self advocating and self promoting has so much lives so much in this business world, but can also really be applied to all types of relationships too. So the idea that, I go and I tell my clients, hey, I can do A, B, and C, and here are my examples. and this is my time frame, and this is the great stuff that I know I can do for you. That's, self promotion. Um, but at the same time, your parents might need something, or, you know, um, one year we had way more people coming to our Thanksgiving than we were expecting, and my mom just didn't know what to do, and she didn't have the space. And just, saying, "Hey mom, I know I can host. I know I have this space. I know I can help you cook, and I can be part of this to help you because I know I can do that." So I think there's just lots of different ways of just recognizing your strengths, and telling people about it. And you don't want to exaggerate, but at the same time, you never ever want to downplay yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that it's so easy for us to downplay ourselves. I know, especially, well, for me, I as a woman, I've found that it's been just kind of ingrained in me that, be humble, don't be boastful. So I will say something to a girlfriend, and she'll agree, like, "Oh yeah." And then I'll say something to a guy friend. He's like, "Well, that's nothing. Like, you should just talk about it more." And I'm like, "You don't understand." So it's true. It's kind of, again, changing that narrative and realizing, yeah, I can do this. There's nothing wrong with being proud or knowing that I can do it.
Absolutely. And my husband is a recruiter. He works for an agency, so he works with all different types of companies to place people at their companies. And he had one woman who had all the right experience. He interviewed her. She was perfect for the job, so he sent her to get interviewed by the company, and it was for a managerial position. She comes back, and the company tells my husband, "Well, why did you send her? She's not good. She doesn't have any managerial experience." My husband's like, "Well, that's weird because, like, she does." Um, and then he gets on the phone to talk with the candidate, and she says, "They never asked me about my managerial experience. And they never
Mm.
even said that this was going to be a manager role. They made it sound like it wasn't a role for manager. So I just never thought to bring it up." And so I think there's like this combination of that, that can, our biases will have people like not ask you the questions because they just already inherently are biased that, like, she probably isn't a manager, so I'm not going to ask her about that. And then women are told not to boast and to stay humble, so she didn't insert herself to explain, "I have managerial experience. I would be a great manager for you." So it's kind of like that double-edged sword, I guess, of where you can't just sit there and wait for someone to brag about you. You got to brag about yourself.
Amen. I agree. Nicole, what about you?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to like really like say your self-worth to people when you're not confident in that worth. I think like in my industry especially, like there's a lot of kind of secrecy around like rates people charge, and I mean companies want to try to get you like as low as possible. And it's like I always ask for more than what I would do a project for. Like usually like 40 to 50% more than what I would do it for. And I mean, last year, like I negotiated everything I worked on, and I didn't get less than like 40% more than like what I would have done it before. So, I mean, I made a lot more money that way. And like most of the time, it was literally just me asking and saying, like, they would come to me with an offer, and I'm like, oh, this is what I can do it for with that scope of work. And then they were like, okay. And I was like, cool, great.
Absolutely. You don't know until you ask.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
exactly.
just asking, I think, is like a huge step that like most women don't take for themselves, in my opinion.
It's true. It's true. We don't think to ask, or we don't feel like we can ask. And I know my dad has always told me, in all aspects of life, like whether I'm when I was a kid and asked to have a friend over, or if I was asking for more help or something, he would always say, "Marina, the answer is always no if you don't ask. So we better just ask." And it's like, "Yeah, okay." And I always thought that was funny, but it's true. It's, we have to ask.
Absolutely. And I think I listened to one of your episodes a couple weeks ago talking about imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
And I think that is absolutely key to the idea of self promotion and self advocacy because it was like 2 years ago that I learned about this. And I remember being at a talk for women, and I was filming the talk, and the presenter explained, what imposter syndrome was. And there was like a light bulb moment of, oh, I'm not the only one who thinks that I've been, that every time someone says, can you do this? I have to go through like 55 moments of my life when I've done that before to convince myself, yes, I can do that. Um, so, like, understanding that that's a real thing that many people, especially women, go through kind of helps me to say, I feel this doubt. You know what? It's that stupid imposter syndrome. So I'm just going to like not believe it because it's wrong.
Mhm. It is wrong. Yeah, I definitely think that so many of us are like capable of so much more than we actually allow ourselves to believe that we're capable of. And it holds us back so much.
But not anymore. We're
No.
coming for you.
Yes.
Universe 2020, 2021, everything that's ahead of us. Angela, it's been so great to have you here. I'm so excited that we got to ask you all about how you promote and advocate for yourself and your business. And I think we're all just going to leave this conversation a little bit better. Is there anything else you want to say, or any like words of wisdom you want to share for someone who might be considering pivoting during this time?
I think the most important thing is to be informed and do your research. And I think that's just kind of good lesson in life to know whether you're working at a company, know what your rights are as an employee. Whether you're going to start a company of yourself by yourself, know what other people are charging, know what the landscape is of that industry, and always be looking towards where you want to be and not where you are right now.
Awesome. I love it. Well, this has been another episode of the Gen 20 podcast. We hope you liked it. And if you have a moment, please leave a review or drop us a 5-star rating. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.